He wakes up in a stranger's body. His thin arms are covered in calluses and scrapes. His stomach has been empty for 2 days, and a broad-shouldered man standing in the doorway says that anyone who returns empty-handed won't be sitting down for dinner. Park Si-hyun lies on a rough cot beneath a ceiling of blackened planks. The air is thick with smoke and rancid grease. He tries to sit up and almost falls back down. His muscles won't obey him. His hands are shaking. But these hands know the axe, the rope, and the cold. And he remembers his real hands, soft, clean hands, the hands of a student who used to flip through botany textbooks and shoot a bow at the archery range on weekends. The door swings open without a knock. A man in his 50s, his face weathered to the color of stone, fixes him with a piercing gaze. He utters a single phrase and leaves. Si-hyun understands every word. The problem is that the language is unfamiliar to him. The meanings flare up in his head as if someone had sewn a dictionary directly into his brain. He steps outside. Grannmerk. The word comes to him on its own. 400 people at the edge of the world. The settlement on a gentle hill is surrounded by a palisade of sharpened logs. Beyond the palisade stands a wall of trees with black trunks stretching into the fog. The Wildlands. A land of impenetrable thickets and mutated beasts, a border that normal people don't cross. But the abnormal ones do, and never return. The air smells of pine needles, dampness, and something sour. Si-hyun doesn't immediately realize that the sour smell is hunger. His stomach has been empty for 2 days. 3 hunters pass by, carrying bows on their backs. One nudges Si-hyun with his shoulder without looking. The second one calls over his shoulder that he better not disgrace the Brotherhood and bring back at least a mouse. The third just spits. A memory from someone else's past surfaces. He's an apprentice in the Hunter's Brotherhood. 2 years as an apprentice, the worst of them all. His arrows fly wide. He shot a rabbit twice this season, and both times in the hind leg. The Brotherhood tolerates him only because expelling an orphan would mean sending him to his death. But their patience is running out. It's been 4 months without a decent catch. The animals have retreated deep into the wildlands. The granaries are empty. 6 weeks until winter. Si-hyun returns home. A bow stands in the corner, short, rough, a string made of sinew. Next to it is a quiver with 7 arrows. He takes the bow in his hands. His body remembers the grip. His fingers rest on the handle as if by habit. The tremor won't go away. He is the last to leave the settlement. All the hunters have long since scattered along the trails. No one waited for him. No one called him to come along. The forest greets him with silence. No birds, no rustling. The trees are silent, as if holding their breath. An hour later, he finds a clearing. He sits down under an old pine tree. He leans his back against the trunk. He closes his eyes. If he doesn't kill a rabbit today, he won't eat. If he doesn't eat for 3 days, he'll die. The math is simple. And then he thinks about something else. He's a botanist. He knows plants. He knows anatomy from textbooks. He knows where a rabbit's heart is. Between the 3rd and 4th ribs on the left, just below the shoulder blade. A small target the size of a walnut, but he knows where it is. His hands stop trembling. He doesn't even notice when it happens. It's just that at some point, his fingers freeze on the bow. A rustle to the left. In the elderberry bushes, a gray rabbit emerges into the clearing. Large, well-fed. One of the few that didn't venture deeper into the woods. Si-hyun slowly raises his bow. He nocks an arrow. He pulls the string back to his ear. The rabbit freezes. Si-hyun freezes. There is no wind. And then, words flash before his eyes. Semi-transparent letters hang in the air like lines on a screen that doesn't exist. Trophy hunt. A hit to the heart doubles the kill. The archer determines the chance of a hit. Si-hyun blinks. The letters don't disappear. He blinks again. The letters fade on their own after a second. The rabbit is still sitting in the clearing. Si-hyun exhales. Between the third and fourth ribs, on the left, just below the shoulder blade. He releases the bowstring. The arrow strikes the rabbit squarely in the side. The little creature twitches and falls. It doesn't squeak. It doesn't struggle. It just falls. Instant death. Si-hyun approaches. The rabbit is lying on its side. The arrow is sticking out exactly where he aimed. In the heart. And next to it lies a second rabbit. Exactly the same size, with the same gray fur. No arrow, just dead. And this is where the strangest part begins. Si-hyun drops to his knees. He touches the second rabbit. It's warm. Real. The fur under his fingers is soft and thick. He lifts both by their hind legs. They weigh the same. He stands in the middle of the clearing with 2 rabbits in his hands and says nothing. Then he sits back down under the pine tree. He pulls a knife from his belt. He butchers both of them. His hands move on their own. Someone else's memory knows how to skin them and separate the meat from the bones. He builds a small fire. He threads the meat onto a stick. The smell of roasted rabbit drifts across the clearing. Si-hyun eats slowly. For the first time in 2 days, something warm enters his stomach. He eats and looks into the forest. He doesn't take the second rabbit back to the village. He hides it in a tree hollow, wrapped in burdock leaves. He still doesn't understand what happened. He doesn't understand the rules. He doesn't understand the boundaries. He knows only one thing. He shot it in the heart and got a double catch. 1 rabbit equals 2 rabbits. That's impossible. But both rabbits are real, and the meat is real, and the feeling of fullness is real. Si-hyun puts out the campfire. He covers it with dirt. He takes his bow and walks back to Grannmerk empty-handed. Today he ate. Tomorrow he'll figure it out. The morning began in silence. Si-hyun lay on his cot and stared at the ceiling. His body ached, not from work, but from something else. A deep fatigue settled in his muscles as if he'd run 10 kilometers yesterday, even though he'd only shot 1 rabbit. He sat up. His head spun slightly. After a minute, it subsided. He recalled yesterday. 2 rabbits from a single shot. A system message flashed before his eyes. Doubling. It wasn't a dream. The meat in his stomach was real. The second rabbit lay in a tree hollow, wrapped in burdock leaves. Si-hyun stepped out of the house. The settlement was slowly waking up. Smoke crept from the chimneys. Women carried water from the well. Children sat on the doorsteps, silent. Hungry children don't play. They sit and wait. Si-hyun walked toward the palisade. The guard at the gate nodded indifferently at him. He went into the forest. It took half an hour to reach the clearing. The tree hollow was still there. So was the rabbit. The meat hadn't spoiled overnight. The cool air had preserved it. Si-hyun picked up the carcass and headed back. He thought as he walked. The system said that a shot to the heart doubles the loot. The chance of a hit is determined by the shooter, so there's no magical help with aiming. You have to shoot yourself. You have to hit the target yourself. Yesterday he hit it because he knew the anatomy. A rabbit is small, its heart is tiny. But he hit it from 15 paces away. 1 shot, 1 hit. It could have been luck. He had to test it. Si-hyun returned to Grannmerk and walked past the common courtyard where the hunters gathered before setting out. Horg stood in the center, assigning directions. He saw Si-hyun. He looked at the rabbit in his hand. He said nothing. He just nodded toward the kitchen. Si-hyun took the rabbit to the old woman Bryn. She took the carcass in silence. She weighed it in her hand. She gave Si-hyun a long look. She placed the rabbit on the cutting table. Then she took a wooden bowl from the cauldron. She poured some thin barley porridge into it. She handed it to him. It was a second helping. He hadn't contributed anything to the communal cauldron yesterday. According to the rules, he wasn't even entitled to a regular portion. But Bryn poured him a second helping. Si-hyun took the bowl. He sat down in a corner of the kitchen. He ate slowly. The porridge was bland and watery, but the warmth spread through his body, and the trembling in his hands subsided. He finished eating. He returned the bowl. Bryn nodded. Si-hyun took his bow and headed back into the forest. This time, he went farther. He passed the clearing where he had been shooting yesterday. He went a kilometer deeper into the forest. The forest was denser here. Light barely filtered through the treetops. The underbrush was thick. Ferns came up to his waist. Si-hyun stopped and listened. The wind rustled the treetops. Far to his right, a branch snapped. He followed the sound. 10 minutes later, he spotted a rabbit, a brown one, smaller than yesterday's. The little creature was sitting under a bush, gnawing on a root. Si-hyun dropped to one knee. He about 20 paces away, further than yesterday. He raised his bow. He nocked an arrow. He drew the bowstring between the third and fourth ribs, on the left. The rabbit was sitting sideways to him, a perfect angle. He exhaled and released the bowstring. The arrow struck the rabbit in the side. The little creature fell. A second one appeared nearby. Si-hyun walked over. Both were dead. Both looked the same. The arrow in the first one had struck it right in the heart. He pulled out the arrow. Clean, almost no blood. The rabbit had died instantly. Fatigue set in immediately. Not severe, a slight dizziness and weakness in his knees. Just like yesterday. One double kill equals an hour or two of exhaustion. He remembered that. Si-hyun continued hunting. An hour later, he found another rabbit. He shot. He hit it. 2 rabbits. The fatigue became more noticeable. His legs felt heavy. His breathing was slightly faster than usual. He kept going. He found a 4th rabbit by the stream. Si-hyun shot from 18 paces. The arrow struck the heart. 2 rabbits. Now the fatigue was really setting in. His hands began to shake again, not from fear, but from exhaustion. His body was telling him to stop. Si-hyun stopped. He counted. 3 doubles in one day, 6 rabbits from 3 shots, plus the one from yesterday, which he'd already given to Bryn. That made 7 rabbits in 2 days. Previously, over 2 seasons, he'd bagged 2. He tied the 6 carcasses in pairs, hung them on a stick, and slung it over his shoulder. He headed for Grannmerk. At the gate, the guard looked at his load and, for the first time in 2 years, addressed him face to face rather than over his shoulder. He asked where he'd caught so many. Si-hyun replied briefly, "In the forest." The guard grunted but let him through. Si-hyun brought the 6 rabbits to the kitchen. Bryn stepped out onto the threshold. She looked at the bundles, then at Si-hyun, then back at the bundles. She said nothing. She took all 6. She carried them away to be butchered. That evening, for the first time in a week, there was meat in the communal pot. Not much. 6 rabbits for 400 people meant a spoonful for each, but it was a spoonful of meat. The children ate silently and intently. The women drank the broth down to the last drop. The men chewed on the gristle and didn't spit it out. Si-hyun sat in the corner with a bowl. Bryn served him a full portion, with meat. He ate and watched the people. 400 people, 6 rabbits. That's not enough. He needs more. He doesn't need rabbits. He needs wild boars. Not 3 doublings a day, but 5. Not 7 carcasses, but 20. But his body couldn't handle it yet. 3 doubles, and he barely made it back to the village. So he needed to train, build up his endurance. Shoot more accurately so as not to waste arrows. Horg approached him after dinner. He stood next to him, looking down at him. He asked where the 6 rabbits came from. Si-hyun replied that he'd been hunting all day. Horg asked where exactly. Si-hyun pointed in a general direction. Horg said that Garm and Steph had hunted in that direction that morning and returned empty-handed. Si-hyun shrugged. He said he'd just been lucky. Horg looked at him for a long time. Then he turned and walked away. Si-hyun finished his broth. He washed his bowl in the water barrel. He went to his quarters. He lay down on his cot. His body was aching with exhaustion. 3 doubles, 6 rabbits, 1 day. That he'd make it 4. The day after tomorrow, 5. He closed his eyes. Before falling asleep, he thought that in his past life he died of an asthma attack, alone, in an empty dormitory. No one had noticed. Here, 400 people had eaten his meat today, and not a single one knew it had been hunted by a guy with trembling hands. That was fine. He didn't need them to know. He needed them to eat. On the 4th day, Sihyon went out hunting before dawn. The settlement was still asleep. The guard at the gate was dozing, leaning against a post. Sihyon slipped past him silently. The forest greeted him with fog, thick and cold. Visibility was 10 steps. Beyond that, everything was lost in a white haze. He followed the trail he'd memorized over the past 3 days. His footsteps were soft. This Si-hyun knew how to move silently through the forest, even if he didn't know how to shoot. 2 years of apprenticeship had taught him at least that much. He passed a clearing with a pine tree. He crossed a stream. He went another kilometer deeper into the woods. There were more rabbits here. They were moving away from the edge of the forest because the Grannmerk hunters had wiped out every living thing near the edge over 4 hungry months. Si-hyun found his first rabbit 20 minutes later. Gray. Large. It was sitting by a shot from 15 steps away, right in the heart. 2 rabbits. Fatigue settled on his shoulders like a thin layer. Bearable. He moved on. The second rabbit, half an hour later. Brown. Smaller. It was running across a clearing. Si-hyun fired on the run. The arrow struck its hind leg. The rabbit screamed. A thin, piercing shriek echoed through the forest. Si-hyun ran up. The rabbit was thrashing on the ground. The arrow had pierced its thigh. There was a lot of blood. Si-hyun pulled out his knife and finished it off with a quick stab to the base of the skull. 1 rabbit. No double. He sat down next to the carcass. He looked at it. A miss. If it didn't hit the heart, it doesn't count as a double. That's an ironclad rule. He'd wasted an arrow on an ordinary rabbit. He had 4 left. Arrows are currency. Every one counts. The arrowheads are forged by Brand the blacksmith, Ilva's father. 1 arrowhead costs a day's work at the forge. Si-hyun makes the shafts himself from ash wood. The fletching is made from goose feathers. It takes half a day to make a single arrow. He can't afford to waste them on misses. He picked up an arrow. The tip had bent against a bone. He straightened it with his fingers as best he could. It would last for a couple more shots. The 3rd rabbit was found near a fallen tree. Si-hyun crept up to within 12 paces. Closer than usual. He wanted to be sure. He shot. Right in the heart. 2 rabbits. Fatigue weighed down on him even more. The 4th rabbit. 15 paces. Right in the heart. 2 rabbits. 3 doubles this morning. His head was spinning. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from exhaustion. He sat down on a fallen tree trunk and closed his eyes. He needed to rest for at least half an hour. He sat there for 40 minutes. The trembling subsided. His head cleared. Not completely, but enough. He gathered his catch, 7 rabbits, 1 ordinary one, and 3 pairs of doubles. He tied them up. He dragged them toward Grannmerk. Halfway there, he stopped. He thought. 7 rabbits in a single morning from a hunter who, for 2 years, couldn't hit a tree from 5 steps away. Horg already suspects something. If he brings 7, Horg will ask questions to which there are no answers. Si-hyun hid 2 rabbits in a hollow by the stream. He carried 5. 5 rabbits is a lot, but not impossible. A good hunter on a lucky day can bag that many. Horg was standing by the kitchen when Si-hyun entered the courtyard. He watched. He counted the carcasses with his eyes. 5. 6 yesterday. 1 the day before yesterday. Horg beckoned him over. Si-hyun approached. Horg asked quietly so the others wouldn't hear. He asked who he was stealing from. Si-hyun looked him in the eye. He replied, "No one." Horg said that Garm and Steph had followed his tracks that morning. They found blood in the clearing, but not a single rabbit nearby, as if someone had taken them earlier. Si-hyun replied that he'd taken them because he'd shot them. Horg asked how he was hitting his mark. He hadn't used to, but now he brings back a full bundle every day. Si-hyun answered simply. He said he aims and shoots, just like everyone else. Horg clenched his jaw. He turned around and walked away. Si-hyun took the rabbits to Bryn. She accepted them in silence. This time, she didn't give him any extra. She just nodded. But there was something, a certain newness in her eyes. In the evening, Si-hyun sat by the wall of the kitchen and sharpened the arrowheads with a stone. A girl walked by. Tall, broad-shouldered for her age. Dark, short hair. Her hands were red from work. She was carrying a bucket of scraps, turnip trimmings, potato peelings, bread crusts. She walked her way to the pen behind the kitchen where 4 village dogs lived. The dogs were skinny. Their ribs jutted out through their skin. The girl poured the scraps into the trough. The dogs pounced on them. She stood and watched them eat. Then she took a piece of flatbread out of her pocket. She broke it in half. She threw 1 half to the smallest dog, who had been pushed away from the trough. She put the other half back in her pocket. That was her dinner. Si-hyun realized this from the way she swallowed, staring at the flatbread in the dog's mouth. She had been feeding the dogs her own food. For the past month, if the fragments of someone else's memory were to be believed. Ylva, Brand, the blacksmith's daughter, 19 years old, a bit rough around the edges, silent. Brand forged arrowheads and horseshoes for the 2 remaining horses. Ylva had been helping him at the forge since she was 12. That explained her broad shoulders and red hands. Si-hyun watched her leave. Then he looked at his bowl. Half the portion was still left. Porridge with meat. He stood up. He walked over to the spot where Ylva usually sat at dinner, a wooden bench against the wall of the smithy. He set the bowl on the bench. He left. He didn't look back. The next morning, the bowl was sitting on the threshold of his house, empty and washed. No note, not a word. The morning of the 5th day. Si-hyun went out hunting with a specific plan. Rabbits provide food, but aren't filling. 400 mouths to feed. 6 weeks until winter. He needs bigger game. He needs a wild boar. A wild boar weighs 10 times as much as a rabbit. A single wild boar is worth 20 rabbits, with 1 shot. But a wild boar's heart is more heavily protected. Thick hide, a layer of fat, stronger ribs. The arrow must pierce through all of that and hit its mark precisely. The distance is shorter, 10 paces at most. And a wild boar at 10 paces is a beast that can kill you before you can kill it. Si-hyun walked deeper into the forest, further than he'd ever gone before, 2 kilometers from Grannmerk, then 3. The forest was changing. The trees were older, the trunks were thicker. There was less light. The underbrush was sparser, but the moss on the rocks was thicker. He was looking for tracks, dug up earth, droppings, scratches on the trunks where wild boars scratched their sides. At the end of the second hour, he found it. Fresh tracks, the ground churned up by hooves, acorns picked out from under the leaves. The boar had been here recently, maybe an hour ago. Si-hyun followed the trail, slowly, every step measured. The wind was in his face. That was good. The scent wouldn't drift back toward the animal. Half an hour later, he saw it. The boar was standing by the stream, drinking. A large male, dark bristles. Its tusks jutted from its lower jaw like curved yellow hooks. 120 kilograms, maybe 130. Si-hyun froze behind a tree. The distance was 25 steps. Too far. An arrow wouldn't pierce the hide from that distance. Or it might pierce it, but it won't be accurate. He needs to get within 12. Better yet, 10. He began to close the distance. A step, a pause. A step, a pause. The boar continued to root without lifting its head. 20 steps. 18, 15. A twig snapped under his foot. The boar raised its head, its small eyes fixed on Si-hyun. Its nostrils flared. Si-hyun froze. He held his breath. The boar snorted. It lowered its head back to the water. Si-hyun waited for 10 heartbeats. He took 2 more steps. 13 steps. He couldn't get any closer. A bush blocked his view beyond that. He raised his bow. The boar was standing sideways. Its left flank was exposed. A boar's heart is located low, between the 4th and 5th ribs, below the middle of its torso. He took aim. His hands didn't tremble. He exhaled. The bowstring slipped from his fingers. The arrow flew 13 steps in a fraction of a second. It struck the boar in the side. The beast twitched. It took a step, then another. Its legs buckled. It fell onto its side. It didn't get up. Si-hyun stood and waited. A minute, 2. The boar didn't move. He walked closer. The arrow was lodged precisely between the 4th and 5th ribs, right in the heart. And next to it lay a second boar. 2 boars. 250 kilograms of meat. Si-hyun stood over them and felt the ground swaying beneath his feet. The double kill of a boar hit him harder than a double kill of a rabbit. Much harder. His legs went wobbly. His ears rang. He sat down on the ground next to the carcasses. He sat there for 5 minutes. He stood up. He sat down again. His body refused to cooperate. A single wild boar duplication drained him as much as 3 rabbit duplications at once. The size of the prey matters. The larger the animal, the stronger the backlash. He remembered that, too. He stood up on the 3rd try. The problem was simple. He couldn't drag 2 by himself. 120 kilograms each, 240 in total. He weighed 60. It was impossible to drag even a single wild boar 3 kilometers through the forest to Grannmerk on his own. Si-hyun took out his knife. He began butchering the first wild boar right there on the spot. He skinned it. He cut off the hind legs. He carved out the loin and ribs, the liver, the heart, the kidneys. The liver is food too, especially for the hungry. He worked for an hour. His hands moved with confidence. Someone else's memory knew how to butcher a large animal. 2 years of apprenticeship hadn't taught Si-hyun how to shoot, but they had taught him how to work with a knife. He wrapped the meat from the first wild boar in its hide. It made a bundle weighing about 40 kilograms. Heavy, but manageable. He dragged the second wild boar to the river and lowered it into the water. The cold water would preserve the meat for a few hours, longer than it would last in the open air. He hoisted the bundle onto his back and set off for Grannmerk. The 3-kilometer journey took 2 hours. He stopped every 200 steps, set the bundle on the ground, caught his breath, picked it up again, and kept going. At the gate, the guard Fen opened his mouth and didn't close it until Si-hyun had passed by. Si-hyun dropped the bundle by the kitchen. Bryn came out. She unfolded the hide. She saw the meat. She looked at Si-hyun. He said there was just as much left in the forest. He needed help. He needed a horse or 2 men with a stretcher. Bryn nodded and went to Horg. Half an hour later, Horg was standing in front of Si-hyun. Next to him were 2 hunters, Garm and Steph, the very same ones who had followed Si-hyun's tracks and found only blood. Horg looked at the meat laid out on the table in the kitchen, then at Si-hyun. He asked what kind of animal it was. Si-hyun replied that it was a wild boar. Horg asked where the second one was. Si-hyun replied that it was by the stream 2 kilometers to the northeast. Horg ordered Garm and Steph to go with Si-hyun and retrieve the second one. They set off, in silence. Garm walked on the right, Steph on the left. Both glanced at Si-hyun but didn't speak. An hour and a half later, they reached the stream. The second wild boar was lying in the water where Si-hyun had left it. Garm crouched down beside it. He examined the carcass. He turned to Steph. He said there wasn't a single wound on the boar. No arrow, no cut, nothing. The beast was simply dead. Steph looked at Si-hyun. He asked how he'd killed the boar without a single scratch. Si-hyun didn't answer right away. He knew that the second boar had appeared without an arrow, a replica of the kill, a perfect duplicate, but with no sign of a kill. He said he'd found it dead next to the first one. Maybe it died of illness. Maybe its heart gave out. It happens. Garm and Steph exchanged glances. They didn't believe it. But meat is meat. They butchered the second boar right there. The 3 of them carried the meat away. That evening, Grannmerk ate. For real. 250 kilograms of boar meat for 400 people. More than half a kilogram for each person. Bryn was cooking 2 pots at the same time. The meat soup was thick and fatty. Chunks of meat the size of a fist floated in the broth. The children ate and asked for seconds. For the first time in 4 months, someone asked for seconds. Before, there had been nothing to ask for. Si-hyun sat in his corner. He ate in silence. He watched the people. A woman by the hearth was crying into her bowl. Not out of grief, but because the meat was hot and there was so much of it. The old man by the door ate slowly and squinted. 2 boys, about 10 years old, were fighting over a marrow bone. Bryn pulled them apart and gave each of them a bone. Horg sat across the hall from Si-hyun. He was eating his portion. He watched the boy over the rim of his raised bowl. He didn't take his eyes off him. After dinner, Si-hyun went out into the courtyard. The air had cooled. The sky was clear, and the stars hung low over the rooftops. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. Ylva. She was standing 3 steps away. Her arms were crossed over her chest. She was looking at him the same way Horg had, scrutinizingly, but without suspicion, with something else. She said, "Thank you for the bowl, last week." Si-hyun nodded. She stood there for another second, turned around, walked away. Si-hyun watched her go. Then he went to his room to sleep. The next morning he went back into the forest, but this time not for rabbits, and not for wild boars. He was looking for traces of a forest bull. A forest bull weighs 300 kilograms live weight. A double-sized forest bull weighs 600. That's enough to feed the whole village for a week. But a forest bull isn't a wild boar. It's fast, cautious, Its horns have a span of 1 meter. Its hooves can kick you to death, and its heart is protected by a powerful rib cage. The arrow must strike precisely between the ribs at the right angle, otherwise it will get stuck in the bone. Si-hyun walked for 3 hours. He found some old droppings, hoof prints in the mud by the watering hole, but he didn't find the bull itself. The animals had gone deeper into the wildlands, to where the territory of the dark herds begins. He reached the border. He sensed it, not saw it, but sensed it. The air had changed. It felt heavy. It smelled of rot and something sweet at the same time. The trees beyond the invisible line looked sick. Their bark was cracking and oozing dark resin. The leaves on the branches weren't green, but grayish yellow. Not the yellow of autumn, it was a sickly yellow. The botanist inside Sihyon noticed it right away. The forest is sick. The trees' roots are rotting from the inside. Something is attacking them underground. He crouched down at the edge. He touched the ground. The soil was soft, too soft, as if there were a void beneath the top layer, or rot. He dug up a handful of soil. He sniffed it. A sour smell. Not the normal acidity of the soil, but something else. Something alive was rotting underground and poisoning the roots. Si-hyun stood up. He looked deep into the wildlands. Dark, quiet, not a sound, no movement, complete silence. This wasn't right. In a healthy forest, there are always sounds. Birds, insects, the wind in the branches. Here, there was nothing. He turned around and headed back. 3 hours to Grannmerk. On the way, he thought, the dark hordes had driven the animals to the border. Then the animals had gone even farther. Now there was almost no ordinary game within safe hunting range. Rabbits were still to be found. Wild boars were rarer. The aurochs were gone entirely. If he wanted to feed 400 people all winter, he'd have to go deeper, into the sick forest, into the realm of the dark flocks. He returned to Grannmerk by evening, empty-handed. The first fruitless day in a week. Horg noticed it. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. The second week. Sihyon had settled into a routine. Up before dawn, out into the forest, 3 hours of hunting, return with game. Every day he brought back 4 to 6 rabbits, sometimes a small deer. Twice that week, a wild boar. He stopped hiding the quantity. There was no point in stashing the game in tree hollows. The village needed every piece of meat, and he couldn't afford to be cautious when the children were going to bed hungry. Horg was watching him, openly, without hiding. On the 3rd day of the 2nd week, he followed him into the forest with Garm. Si-hyun knew they were coming. He heard footsteps 100 paces behind him, heavy ones. Hunters move more quietly than ordinary people, but Si-hyun had spent enough days in the forest to distinguish the sounds. He found a rabbit, shot it, in the heart. 1 became 2. Horg and Garm saw it. They were standing behind some bushes 30 paces away. Si-hyun heard Garm exhale through clenched teeth, a quiet hiss. Si-hyun picked up both rabbits. He turned toward the bushes and said loudly that they could come out. He knew they were there. Horg stepped out first. His looked like stone. Garm followed him, pale. Horg stepped right up close. He looked at the 2 rabbits in Si-hyun's hands, then at the spot where one dead little animal had just been lying, then back at Si-hyun. He asked what they were. Si-hyun was silent for a second. Then he said he didn't know. He said that when he hits the heart exactly, the catch doubles. A second one just appears, the same as the first. He doesn't know why or how. He only knows that it works. Horg listened. His expression didn't change. He asked, "Since when?" Si-hyun replied that it had been like that from the very first day when Horg said that empty hands meant an empty stomach. Horg asked why he hadn't mentioned it. Si-hyun asked in return, "Who would have believed me?" Horg remained silent. It was an honest answer. No one would have believed him. Garm stood behind Horg, shifting his gaze from the rabbits to Si-hyun and back again. He asked him to demonstrate it one more time. Si-hyun nodded. They walked further into the forest. 20 minutes later, they found a rabbit near the roots of an oak tree. Si-hyun took aim. He shot. The arrow pierced the animal's side, straight into the heart. The rabbit fell. A second one appeared nearby. Garm took a step back. Horg approached the second rabbit. He picked it up, examined it, sniffed it, ran his fingers through its fur, checked its eyes. An ordinary rabbit. Dead, no wounds, a real one. Horg laid the rabbit on the ground. He straightened up. He looked at Si-hyun for a long time. Then he said that this was either a blessing or a curse. In either case, the village would have something to eat. He turned around and walked back toward Grannmerk. Garm ran after him. Si-hyun remained standing alone in the forest. He gathered up the rabbits, then he followed. That evening, Horg didn't come to dinner. Bryn said he'd locked himself in his house and wouldn't come out. Si-hyun ate in silence. After dinner, he went to Horg's house. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. Horg opened the door. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from anger. Or from something like anger, but deeper. He told Si-hyun that he had taught him for 2 years. For 2 years he had put up with his shaky hands and wayward shots. For 2 years he'd defended him before the Brotherhood when others demanded that the useless boy be expelled. And now this boy was doing what no hunter in Grannmerk could. And not because he'd learned how, but because it had fallen from the sky. Si-hyun listened. He didn't interrupt. Horg finished. He stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Si-hyun said one sentence. He said it hadn't fallen from the sky, but from his own hands. He hits the heart because he knows where it is, and he shoots by himself. No one pulls the bowstring for him. Horg looked at him. Then he closed the door. Si-hyun stood by the closed door for a moment. Then he left. For 3 days, Horg didn't speak to him. On the 4th day, he came to Si-hyun's house in the morning. He stood on the threshold. He spoke briefly. He said he wanted to learn to shoot like him. He said he wasn't a fool and could see that Si-hyun aimed differently, not at the animal, but at a specific spot on the animal. And he hits it. Every time. Whether it's a double or not, hitting the heart is a skill. He wants to understand it. Si-hyun nodded. From that day on, they went hunting together. Si-hyun taught Horg what the botanist from another world knew: anatomy, the location of organs, a rabbit's heart, a wild boar's heart, a deer's heart. Every animal is built differently, but there are patterns, ribs, spaces, angles. Horg listened intently. He was rough and tough, but not stupid. 52 years in the forest, thousands of animals to his credit. But he'd always shot at the body, at the mass. Wherever it hit, that was fine. The main thing was to hit it. Now he was learning to aim for the heart. On the 3rd day of their joint hunts, Horg hit a rabbit in the heart. From 12 paces. The rabbit died instantly. Just one rabbit. No double kill. The double kill only worked for Si-hyun, but for the first time, Horg had killed an animal with a single shot, without any agony. He looked at the clean carcass, then at Si-hyun. He nodded. He didn't say a word, but from that day on, he stopped calling him a boy. Week 3. Si-hyun brought back 2 wild boars on a single hunt. 4 doubles in 1 day. 2 rabbits and 2 wild boars. He returned barely alive. He collapsed onto his cot and slept for 14 hours. But the meat made it to the kitchen. Bryn worked all night. She salted it. She smoked it. She dried it. Wild boar meat is fattier than rabbit meat. It keeps better. The pantry began to fill up. Not full, not even a quarter full. But for the first time in 4 months, bundles of dried meat appeared on the shelves. The children stopped being silent. They started playing in the yard again after dinner. They ran between the houses and shouted. The sound of children's shouts, after 4 months of silence, was louder than any bell. Old woman Bryn stood in the doorway of the kitchen and listened. Then she returned to the cauldron. Toward the end of the 3rd week, what Si-hyun had been waiting for happened. Little Toby, 8 years old, an orphan. His mother had died of starvation 2 months ago. She'd left him with the community. The community fed him as best they could, which was to say, hardly at all. Toby was so thin that his elbows looked thicker than his forearms. He approached Si-hyun after dinner. He stood beside him. He was silent. Si-hyun looked at him. Toby said he wanted to help. Si-hyun asked how. Toby said he could carry arrows and rabbits. He's strong. He'll manage. Si-hyun looked at the boy's hands, thin as twigs. He said, "All right. Tomorrow morning at the gate." Toby nodded seriously. He left. From that day on, Toby waited for Si-hyun every morning at the gate. He carried the quiver. He carried the prey back. He didn't complain. He didn't talk. He walked beside him and remained silent. Si-hyun fed him personally every evening, a separate bowl, full, with meat. He ate with intense concentration. He licked the bowl until it shone. Then he set it down neatly, said thank you, went off to sleep. The end of the 3rd week, the granary is 1/3 full. There's meat every day. Not much, but there is some. Porg is shooting more accurately. Garm and Steph are silent. Ylva comes to the kitchen every evening, not to Si-hyun, to the dogs. But now she doesn't give them her flatbread. Her bowl is full. The dogs have leftovers. Everyone eats. Toby sleeps by the hearth in the kitchen. Bryn covers him with a blanket. Si-hyun sits on the threshold of his house. He sharpens arrowheads. He looks at the stars. Winter is 5 weeks away. The granary is 1/3 full. It needs to be filled to the brim. He needs oxen. He needs to go to the Wildlands, where the forest is sick and where the dark flocks roam. He set down his knife. He clenched his fist. His hands didn't tremble. They hadn't trembled in a long time. Si-hyun entered the Wildlands at dawn on the 4th week, alone. He didn't tell anyone. Toby was waiting at the gate, but Si-hyun told him to stay. He said he was going far today. The boy didn't argue. He nodded and sat down on a log by the palisade. The forest beyond the border was different. Not right away. The first kilometer looked almost normal. The trees stood straight. The moss on the rocks was green. The birds were silent, but that was nothing new. By the 2nd kilometer, the changes began. The bark on the trunks was cracking along longitudinal fissures, and dark resin oozed from the cracks. Not brown, but almost black. It smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. The leaves on the branches hung gray. Not dry, not dead. Alive, but gray, as if the color had been drained from them. Si-hyun walked and looked. The botanist inside him screamed at every step. The tree's roots jutted out of the ground like swollen veins. Under the bark, he saw dark spots. A fungal infection. Or something like a fungal infection. But no fungus he could recall looked like this. Ordinary fungi attack dead wood. This one was devouring the living wood. He crouched down by a tree. He pried off a piece of bark with his knife. Beneath the bark, the wood was soft and fibrous, damp. Dark streaks radiated from the heartwood to the edges like blood vessels. He sniffed. The same sour smell as at the border, only stronger. The forest was rotting from the inside. Not from the top down, as from drought or frost, but from the bottom up, from the roots to the crown. Whatever something underground was poisoning the roots, and the poison was rising up the trunk like a pipe. Si-hyun straightened up. He looked deep into the forest. Silence. Complete silence. Not even the wind stirred the branches, as if the air had thickened and stopped moving. He walked on, searching for traces of a forest bull. A bull's hooves leave deep impressions. Round, the size of a saucer. He found them an hour later, fresh, pressed into the soft earth. The bull had passed through here that morning, maybe 2 hours ago. The trail led northeast, deeper into the Wildlands. Si-hyun followed the trail. He moved slowly. He measured every step. The wind was blowing in his face, a knife on his belt, a bow in his hand, an arrow nocked. 40 minutes later, he saw the bull. Huge, bigger than he'd imagined. Its antlers were broad and heavy. Its hide was brown with dark spots on its sides. The bull was standing by a tree, scratching itself of its side against the trunk. 30 steps separated him from Si-hyun. Too far. An arrow from his short bow wouldn't pierce the bull's hide from 30 steps away. He needed 15, better yet, 12. He began to creep closer. A step, a pause, a step, 25, 20. The bull stopped scratching. He raised his head. His nostrils flared. 18 paces. The bull turned its head toward Si-hyun. Si-hyun froze. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The bull stared in his direction for about 10 seconds. Then it lowered its head and began nibbling moss off a rock. Si-hyun moved again. 15 steps. 14. The bull stood with its left side facing him. Its ribs were visible beneath the hide. A large beast, 300 kilograms. The heart was low, between the 5th and 6th ribs, protected by a thick layer of muscle and fat. The arrow would have to enter at an angle, slightly upward, to pass between the ribs and reach the heart. Si-hyun raised his bow. He took aim. The spot between the 5th and 6th ribs, slightly below the middle, an upward angle of 3 fingers. He exhaled. He released the bowstring. The arrow struck the bull in the side. The beast flinched, took a step forward, then another, swayed. Its front legs buckled. It fell to its knees, then onto its side. Its whole body twitched once. Then it went still. A second bull appeared beside it, lying on its side, just as huge, just as dead. No wounds. The recoil was terrible. Si-hyun was bent in half. He fell to all fours. Blood flowed from his nose. Drops fell onto the moss, leaving dark spots. His head felt like it was splitting. The muscles in his legs cramped up. He rolled onto his back and lay there, staring at the gray sky through the aching crowns of the trees. A minute. 5. 10. The bleeding from his nose stopped. The cramp subsided. He sat up. The world was still spinning, but more slowly. 2 forest bulls, 600 kilograms of meat, with a single shot. That would be enough to feed the village for a week. But he was alone, 3 kilometers deep into the Wildlands, exhausted, with blood on his chin, and he had to somehow haul 600 kilograms of meat out of here. He couldn't. Physically, he couldn't. He couldn't even drag away a single bull. 300 kilograms. He weighed 60. He needed help. Si-hyun stood up. His legs were wobbly but held him up. He marked the spot. He snapped 3 branches off the surrounding trees at eye level. He stripped a strip of bark from the nearest pine tree, landmarks. Then he headed back, as fast as he could. The journey to Grannmerk took 2.5 hours. He stumbled through the gate, sweaty and ashen-faced. The guard, Fen, called out to him. Si-hyun walked past. He found Horg by the kitchen. He told him that 2 forest bulls were lying in the Wildlands. 600 kilograms. We need people. We need a stretcher. We need a horse. Horg looked at the blood under his nose, at his trembling hands, at his ashen face. He asked one thing. He asked if there were 2 bulls or 1. And the second one just showed up. Sihyon nodded. Horg cursed. Then he turned and began rounding up people. An hour later, a party of 6 hunters with a horse and 2 porters set out from Grannmerk. Sihyon walked ahead, leading the way. Horg was beside him. He was silent. The others were silent too. They reached the bulls by evening. The hunters stood and watched. 2 enormous beasts, identical. One with an arrow in its side, the other without a single wound. Garm crouched down beside the second one. He felt the hide, lifted the eyelid, checked the teeth, turned to Horg, said the beast was genuine in every way. Horg nodded, told them to butcher it. They worked until dark. They loaded the meat onto sleds. A horse pulled one, 4 hunters pulled the other. The return trip through the dark, through the forest, took 3 hours. Sihyon walked last. He could barely move his legs. Toby was waiting at the gate. He ran up, took the bow and quiver from Sihyon, walked beside him. He said nothing. They unloaded the meat at the kitchen. Bryn came out with a lantern. She saw the mountains of meat on the sleds. She shook her head. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work, all night long. By morning, the barn was half full. 600 kilograms of meat, salted, smoked, hanging on hooks, curing on racks over smoldering coals. Sihyon slept until noon. He woke up. His whole body ached, every muscle, every joint. He lay there staring at the ceiling. 1 doubling of a forest bull equals 5 doublings of a wild boar, or 15 doublings of a rabbit. The after effects are proportional to size. A nosebleed is the limit. Beyond that, the body might simply shut down. He remembered. He got up. He went outside. Grannmerk looked different. People walked faster. Their backs were straighter. Their voices were louder. The meat in the granary changed everything. Not just their stomachs, their hope too. People with a full granary walk differently than people with an empty one. At the kitchen, Bryn was handing out the morning porridge with meat. Thick porridge. The children ate and laughed. The old people chewed slowly and nodded to one another. The women chatted by the well, not about hunger, but about how to salt the meat so it would keep longer. Sihyon walked past. Ilva was standing by the forge. She looked at him. He nodded. She nodded back. He went to sharpen his arrows. Winter was 5 weeks away. The granary was half full. He needed 1 more bull, and another, and another. The first month was drawing to a close. The granary was 2/3 full. Si-hyeon went to the Wildlands every other day. He rested between forays. His body demanded rest after each bull hunt. He had found a rhythm. A day of hunting, a day of recovery, a day of hunting. 1 bull per outing. Sometimes 2 boars instead of a bull if he didn't come across one. Rabbits were no longer a target. Too small for 400 mouths to feed. Horg went with him. Not every time, but every other time. He was learning, eagerly and silently. His shooting was changing. He stopped firing into the crowd. He began aiming at specific points. He didn't always hit, but he hit more often. 3 out of 5, then 4 out of 5. For a 52-year-old hunter who had been shooting differently for 30 years, that was fast. Si-hyun respected him for it. He didn't say it out loud, but Horde could tell by the way Si-hyun nodded after a successful shot. On the 26th day, a breakthrough occurred. Si-hyun tracked down a deer in the Wildlands, a large female, 150 kilograms. She was standing in a clearing, eating grass, 14 paces away, a perfect angle, left side. Si-hyun took aim. He fired. The arrow struck true. The doe flinched, but she didn't fall right away. She took 3 steps. She stumbled. She fell onto her front legs. She tried to get up. Her hind legs wouldn't obey her. She lay on her side, breathing rapidly and raspily. The arrow was lodged in her heart, but slightly to the left of center. It had grazed the edge. It hadn't gone all the way through. The heart kept beating for another 30 seconds. The doe looked at Si-hyun with cloudy eyes. He walked over. He took out his knife. He finished her off with a stab to the neck. The doe fell silent. A second one appeared nearby. The double kill had worked, but when Si-hyun butchered both of them, he noticed a difference. The meat of the first doe, the one that had been dying for 30 seconds, was dark. Not spoiled, but dark. The fibers were tough. The blood hadn't completely drained from the muscles because the heart had kept beating while the animal was in agony, pumping blood through the tissues. The meat of the second doe, the duplicate, was the same, dark and tough. The copy mirrored the quality of the original. Si-hyun sat over the 2 carcasses and thought. He remembered the rabbits. They died instantly, an arrow to the heart, death in a second. The meat was light in color, clean, tender. Wild boars also died quickly. The meat was good. But the doe suffered for half a minute, and the meat was worse. Coincidence or a pattern? He tested it on his next hunt. He shot a wild boar, hit it right in the center of the heart. The boar fell and didn't move. Instant death. The meat from both wild boars was perfect. Pink, clean, no dark spots. On the 3rd day, he shot a deer, also right in the heart. The deer died on the spot. Not a step, not a sound. It fell. The meat was clean, light in color, tender. The pattern was confirmed. The cleaner the death, the cleaner the meat. The faster the animal dies, the higher the quality of the game, and the copy mirrors the quality. If the original suffered, the copy also bears traces of suffering. If the original died painlessly, the copy is flawless. That evening, Si-hyun sat on the threshold and took notes. He had a notebook, rough, a leather cover, pages made of pressed bark. Bryn had given it to him during the 2nd week. She said it was for record keeping. He began keeping records. The beast's appearance, approximate weight, shooting distance, point of impact, time of death, meat quality, quality of the hide. Each hunt was a separate entry. The notebook filled up quickly. By the end of the 1st month, it contained 42 entries. The pattern was clear. A quick, clean death meant better meat. That changed everything, not just the result, but the approach as well. He could no longer afford to almost hit his mark. Almost hitting the heart meant suffering for the animal. Suffering for the animal meant dark meat. Dark meat meant bad food. Every shot had to be perfect. Not near the heart, but right in the center of the heart. 1 moment, 1 arrow, 1 death. Painless. This rule changed him as an archer. He began to train differently. He carved a target out of bark the size of a rabbit's heart. He tied it to a tree. He shot from different distances. 10 steps, 15, 20. Again and again. The arrows dulled, the arrowheads bent. He straightened them out and shot again. Horg watched. He asked why such a small target. Si-hyun explained. He talked about the quality of the meat, about the connection between the purity of death and the purity of the game. Horg listened. Then he said his grandfather had said something similar. He said that a beast that had been tortured yields bitter meat. Old men always knew. They just didn't know why. Now Horg knew why. He too began shooting at the small target. It changed him too. Not just his accuracy, his attitude toward the prey. Before, a beast was just meat on legs. Now, a beast was a creature that deserved a quick death. Not out of sympathy, out of respect, and out of practicality. The second month began with rain. For 3 days straight, the rain poured without stopping. The forest became soggy. The trails turned to mud. Hunting was impossible. Si-hyun sat in the house and sharpened arrows. Toby sat beside him and learned how to fletch them. His little fingers awkwardly tied the feathers to the shaft. Crooked. Si-hyun corrected them, showed him how. Toby redid them. On the 4th day, the rain stopped. Si-hyun went out into the forest. The ground was soft, and the tracks were as clear as day. He found the bull's tracks an hour later. He followed them. The bull had gone deep into the wilderness, 4 kilometers into the wildlands, further than Si-hyun had ever ventured before. The forest here was utterly sick. The trees stood bare. The bark was flaking off in sheets. Beneath it lay bare wood the color of old bone. The moss on the rocks was not green, but brown, rotten. The smell hung thick and heavy, sweet rot. Si-hyun walked, counting his steps. 4,000 from Grannmerk. He had never ventured this far in before. He found the bull on the bank of a narrow stream. The beast was drinking water. Si-hyun crept up to within 13 steps. He raised his bow. He took aim, right in the center of the heart. He shot. The bull fell instantly. Not a step, not a sound. A perfect shot. A second one appeared nearby. The recoil hit him. Si-hyun staggered but stayed on his feet. No blood came from his nose. His body was getting used to it. Slowly, but surely. He sat down on a rock, caught his breath, stood up, and then he heard it. A sound. Low, muffled, as if something very large were breathing in the darkness among the trees. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, the rhythmic breathing of something alive, somewhere 100 paces to the north. Si-hyun froze. His hand rested on the second arrow in his quiver. He stood and listened. The breathing continued, steady, calm. It wasn't getting closer. It wasn't getting farther away. Something was standing or lying in the forest and breathing. Si-hyun didn't go to check it out. He turned around. He marked the trees. He headed back to Grannmerk for help. He walked quickly. He didn't run, but he walked as fast as he could. 2 hours later, he was at the gate. He gathered Horg and 4 hunters. They returned for the bulls. They took the meat. By then, the breathing in the forest had stopped, or gone away, or gone silent. Si-hyun didn't tell the others. He told only Horg, quietly. That evening, by the kitchen, he said that 4 kilometers deep into the wildlands, he'd heard the breathing of something large. Horg listened. Then he said that the wildlands weren't just a forest, that the elders had told stories about things that lived deep within. Not beasts, not people, something else. Si-hyun nodded. He knew that sooner or later he'd come face to face with it, but not today. Today, he has 600 kilograms of meat and the granary is almost full. Winter is 4 weeks away. He'll make it in time. 5 weeks until winter. The granary is 3/4 full. The meat hangs in rows on hooks, salted, smoked, dried. Bryn keeps track. Every piece is recorded, weight, type, and date of preparation. She knows how much meat the village eats in a day. 3 kilograms per family of 4. 200 families. 600 kilograms a day for everyone. There are now about 5 metric tons in the granary. Enough for 8 days if they don't ration. Enough for 12 if they stretch it out. Winter lasts 4 months. 120 days. They'll need 72 metric tons of meat to feed everyone their fill. Or 48 if we ration and add turnips and barley. 5 metric tons out of 48, 1/10. Si-hyun sat on the threshold and did the math. The numbers didn't add up. Even if he doubled the amount, even with the bulls, he couldn't come up with 48 metric tons in 4 weeks. One bull is 300 kilograms. Doubled, that's 600. One bull a day is the maximum his body can handle. 600 kilograms a day. In 28 days, that's 16,800 kilograms. About 17 metric tons. Plus what he already has. 22 metric tons. Less than half of what's needed. He sat there, staring at the numbers in his notebook. Then he closed the notebook. He stood up. He walked over to Horg. He told him the truth. He said there wouldn't be enough meat. Not even with his ability. One hunter isn't enough for 400 mouths for 4 months of winter. Horg listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he asked what he was proposing. Sihyon proposed a plan. He would continue hunting large game in the Wildlands. Every day. No days off. His body would hold up. It had to hold up. At the same time, Horg would organize the gathering of everything else. Turnips from the fields, barley, mushrooms, berries, everything that could be gathered before the snow fell. Fish from the stream on the eastern edge, snares for small game at the forest's edge. Every source of food would be utilized. Horg nodded. He said it was settled. The next morning, Grannmerk set out. Horg assigned the people their tasks. 30 men to the fields to dig up turnips. 20 women into the forest for mushrooms and berries. 10 fishermen to the stream. 15 hunters for small game. Snares, traps, nooses. Sihyon went to the Wildlands, alone, at dawn. He found a bull by noon, shot it, took a second shot, recoil, caught his breath, marked the spot, went to get help, returned with Garm and Steph. They hauled away the meat. By evening, 600 kilograms had been added to the granary. The same thing happened on the second day, and on the third. His body held up. He started nosebleeding on the 4th day after his second double kill, a wild boar he'd found on the way to the bull. 2 double kills in 1 day, a bull and a wild boar. He'd overestimated his strength. He lay on the moss for 20 minutes while Garm and Steph stood nearby, waiting in silence. Then he got up. He went home. He lay down. He slept for 16 hours. On the 6th day, Ylva came. She knocked on the door. Si-hyeon opened it. She stood in the doorway with a bag slung over her shoulder. She untied the bag. She took out arrowheads. 8 of them. Brand new, shiny, forged yesterday. She said her father had made them. Brand, the blacksmith. Si-hyeon looked at the arrowheads. They were better than the ones he'd been using. Sharper, heavier, with curved edges that would prevent the arrow from passing straight through and coming out the other side. The arrow would get stuck in the body. In the heart. Maximum penetration. He took the arrowheads, said thank you. Ylva nodded. Then she said she'd go with him tomorrow. Si-hyun looked at her. She said she knew how to move through the woods, quieter than he did, and she could read tracks better. She wouldn't shoot. She'd watch his back. Because he went into the wildlands alone every day, and that was foolish. Si-hyun wanted to refuse. He looked at her. She wasn't asking. She was presenting him with a fait accompli. He nodded. The next day they set out together. Ylva walked ahead. He followed behind her. She really did move more quietly. Much more quietly. Si-hyun moved well for a former student. Ylva moved like a forest cat. Not a sound, not a crunch, not a rustle. She found the bull's tracks in 40 minutes. It would have taken Si-hyun an hour, maybe an hour and a half. She read the forest like a book. The bull stopped right here, turned here, picked up speed here. Something had startled him. They found the bull 20 minutes later by following the trail. Ylva pointed the way. Si-hyun approached from downwind. 15 steps, a shot, right in the heart. The bull fell. A second one appeared nearby. Ylva stood 20 steps behind. She saw everything. Her expression didn't change. She walked over to the two bulls. She looked at them. She touched the second one. She turned to Si-hyun. She said nothing. She began to butcher them. She worked quickly and skillfully, faster than Si-hyun. He joined her. Together, they butchered both bulls in an hour. Si-hyun and Ylva carried the meat out in 2 trips, without a horse, without a stretcher, just the two of them. She was stronger than him, noticeably stronger. She hauled a 60-kilogram bale without slowing her pace. From that day on, Ylva went with him every day. They didn't talk in the forest. They didn't talk on the way back. They hardly ever talked in the village. She would come in the morning. They would leave. They would hunt. They would return. She would go to her place. He would go to his. But every evening, there was a bowl on the bench by the forge. Full. With meat. For her. She would take it, wash it, return it in the morning, without a word. Midway through the 5th week, the granary was almost completely full. The turnips had been harvested from the fields, the barley had been threshed, the mushrooms had been dried, the fish had been salted. Grannmerk was preparing for winter as he had never prepared before. Bryn did the math. 29 metric tons of meat, plus turnips, barley, mushrooms, and fish. Not 48, not ideal, but enough so that no one would starve to death. Barely getting by, but alive. If Sihyon continued to hunt at least twice a week during the winter, that would be enough. Horg made an announcement to the village. He said that winter would be harsh, but they were ready. He said the granaries were fuller than they had been in the last 3 years. He said that everyone who had worked in the fields and on the harvest had earned a place at the winter table. He didn't mention Sihyon by name, but everyone knew. 400 people knew who brought meat every evening, who set out for the wildlands at dawn and returned gray with exhaustion, a bundle on his back. The boy with trembling hands who had been called useless for 2 years. That evening, Sihyon sat by the fire in the courtyard. Toby was beside him. The boy was sharpening an arrowhead, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Sihyon stared into the fire. He was thinking. Winter was 3 weeks away. There would be enough meat if they rationed it. But he wasn't going to ration it. He was going to keep hunting. Every week. In the wildlands during winter. Through the snow. Following the tracks. In the cold. Because 400 people shouldn't have to scrape by. They should eat their fill. He looked at his hands. The calluses had grown tougher. The scrapes had healed. The trembling had disappeared completely. These hands had become his, not someone else's, his own. Winter came sooner than expected, not in 3 weeks, but in 2. Thick, heavy snow fell during the night. By morning, Grannmerk was knee-deep in white. The roofs were sagging. The palisade had turned white. The forest beyond the walls had turned into a wall of snow-laden branches. The temperature had plummeted overnight. The frost bit into the walls of the houses. The hearths burned ceaselessly. Firewood had also been stockpiled. Horg had seen to it. 20 bundles for each house, plus a general supply in the kitchen. Bryn kept the stove stoked around the clock. The soup never cooled in the cauldron. Meat was brought from the granary in portions, strictly measured. Bryn counted the pieces like coins. Every gram was accounted for. During the first week of winter, Si-hyeon didn't go out hunting. The snow was too deep. The trails were blocked. No tracks were visible. The forest lay silent beneath a white blanket. He sat at home and worked on his arrows. He made new shafts. He attached the arrowheads that Brand had forged. He smoothed out the fletching. Toby sat beside him and watched. His fingers had grown stronger over the past 2 months. The feathers lay more evenly. The knots held tighter. Si-hyeon demonstrated. Toby repeated the steps, silently. On the 8th day of winter, the snow settled. The frost eased by a degree. Si-hyeon went out into the forest. Alone. Ylva stayed behind. Her father had come down with a cold. Brand had been coughing for 3 days. She was warming up a decoction for him and hadn't left his bedside. Si-hyun walked through the snow. It was hard. His legs sank knee-deep. Every step took 3 times as much effort as in the summer. It took him 4 hours to reach the Wildlands instead of the usual 1.5. But the tracks in the snow were as clear as day. Every animal left a trail: a rabbit, a deer, a fox, and a bull. Wide, deep indentations from its hooves. The bull had passed through here that morning. Si-hyun followed the trail. He found the bull an hour later. The animal was standing under a fir tree, sheltering from the wind. Si-hyun crept up to within 14 steps. The snow muffled the sounds. The bull didn't hear him. A shot, right in the heart. Instant death. The recoil, moderate, tolerable. The body fell. 2 months of daily hunts had toughened him up. What used to knock him off his feet now simply weighed heavily on his shoulders. He marked the spot. He headed back. He brought Garm and Stefa with a sled. They hauled off the meat. The sled moved more easily over the snow than on the ground. It glided. One advantage of winter. He went into the forest every 2 days, sometimes every 3 when a blizzard buried the trails. During the first month of winter, he bagged 8 bulls, 16 counting the double, almost 5 metric tons of meat. The granary was holding up. Bryn had done the math. If things kept going this way, they'd make it to spring without going hungry. Not just scraping by, but living normally, with meat every day, with hearty soup, with supplements for the children. Si-hyun allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief, for the first time in 2 months. In the 3rd week of winter, a blizzard struck, a real one. Not just a snowfall, but a wall of wind and ice. For 3 days, the villagers didn't set foot outside their homes. The wind howled over the rooftops. Snow piled up against the doors. In the morning, they had to dig their way out. Si-hyun sat in his house and listened to the wind. On the 2nd day of the blizzard, Toby came to see him. The boy squeezed through the door, covered in snow. His cheeks were red from the cold. Si-hyun sat him down by the hearth. He gave him some hot broth from a flask. Toby warmed his hands by the fire and said nothing. Then he asked. He asked why Si-hyun was doing all this, why he hunted every day, why he fed everyone. Si-hyun stared at the fire for a long time. Then he answered. He said it was because he could. Because he knows how to shoot straight for the heart. Because if you know how to do something and don't do it, then what's the point of knowing how? Toby thought about it. Then he nodded. Seriously, like a grown-up. He said he'd be like that too, once he learned to shoot. He'd feed people. Si-hyun looked at him, an 8-year-old boy, skin and bones, big dark eyes. Serious, not childish. Hunger had taken his childhood away, but it hadn't taken something else, something that burned inside him, quietly and steadily. Si-hyun placed his hand on the boy's head. He held it there for a second. Then he withdrew it. Toby finished his broth. He went back to the kitchen. Bryn was waiting for him at the door. The blizzard ended on the 4th day. Si-hyun went out into the forest. The snow was waist deep. Every step felt like climbing a mountain. He walked for 2 hours to the border of the Wildlands, then another hour deeper in. There were no tracks. The blizzard had swept everything away. He searched for 3 hours. Nothing. No bull, no boar, no deer. The animals had gone even deeper. The blizzard had driven them into the thickest part of the forest, where the dark hordes were. Sihyon stood in the lifeless white forest and listened. Silence. Then, no longer silence. A sound. The same one he'd heard 2 months ago. Breathing. Low, deep, rhythmic. But closer than before. Much closer. Not 100 paces away, but 50, maybe 40. Sihyon slowly turned his head. Between the trees, he saw a shadow. A large one, taller than a person. It stood motionless, breathing. Its contours were blurred. Not a beast, not a tree, something in between. Sihyon placed his hand on an arrow in his quiver. The shadow didn't move. Its breathing didn't change. Steady, calm, not threatening, as if it were simply watching. Sihyon stood and watched. The shadow stood and breathed. A minute, 2, 3. Then the shadow shifted, not toward him, to the side. Slowly, silently, and it vanished between the tree trunks. The breathing stopped. Sihyon stood there for another 5 minutes. Then he exhaled. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart was racing. He turned around and walked back, empty-handed, the first fruitless day in 3 weeks. That night he had a dream. A forest. Not sick, healthy, green. Sunlight filtering through the canopy. And in the middle of the forest, a tree. Huge. A trunk 10 arm spans wide, its crown reaching into the sky. And on the trunk, a face. Old, wrinkled, with closed eyes. The lips were moving, saying something. Sihyon couldn't hear the words. He only saw the lips moving. Then the eyes opened, green, bright, alive. They looked at Sihyon, and he woke up. Morning, a ceiling of blackened planks, cold, reality. He sat up on the cot. He rubbed his face. The dream had been vivid. Too vivid for an ordinary dream. A tree with a face? The spirit of the forest. He didn't know where this knowledge came from, but he knew it was true. What breathed in the Wildlands and what he had seen in his dream were one and the same. The forest was trying to tell him something. Midwinter. 2 months of cold were behind them. 2 lay ahead. The granary was holding up. The meat was being used up at a steady pace. Bryn counted every piece and never made a mistake. The village was alive. It wasn't merely surviving, it was living. Children played snowball fights in the yard. Women sewed by the hearths. Men repaired walls and roofs. Every morning, Horg walked around the palisade, checking the posts. The frost could split a tree in half overnight. Si-hyeon continued to hunt twice a week. Ylva went with him. Brand had recovered. His cough was gone. He was forging again. The sound of the hammer in the mornings had become part of Grannmerk's rhythm, like a rooster's crow, like the creak of a well gate. In the 6th week of winter, a messenger arrived, on horseback. The horse was covered in hoarfrost. The man wore a cloak bearing a coat of arms. Si-hyun recognized the coat of arms from someone else's memory, a silver falcon on a blue field. Lord Aymeric. The messenger brought a message. Lord Aymeric will arrive in 10 days for a visit. He wants to see the settlement. He wants to discuss matters. Horg received the messenger, fed him, sent him back. Then he came to Si-hyun, sat down across from him, said that this was bad. Aymeric doesn't visit villages just like that. He's heard about the meat, about the granaries, about the young man who feeds 400 people in the hungriest part of the borderlands. Rumors travel faster than horses. Sihyon listened. He asked what to expect. Horg explained. Aymeric is a nobleman, a local baron. Formally, Grannmerk is on his land. He's entitled to a tithe, 1/10 of the settlement's income. Before, the tithe was a joke. 1/10 of nothing is nothing. But now the granaries are full. 1/10 of a full granary is a serious amount. And Aymeric might want more. He might want to know where all that meat is coming from. He might want to take the hunter for himself. He thought about it for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he went to Horg with a plan. Aymeric needs to be given enough so that he leaves satisfied, but not too much so as not to reveal the true size of the reserves. 4 boars. Good meat. A generous gift from a poor village. Aymeric would take it as a sign of respect. Keep quiet about the bulls. Keep quiet about doubling the amount. As for the barn, show only the front part where the usual catch hangs. Lock the back part and cover it with burlap. Horg nodded. He said that was clever. He asked when Sihyon had become like this. Sihyon didn't answer. 5 days before Aymric's arrival, Sihyon had shot 2 wild boars, 4, counting the doubled portion. Bryn selected the best cuts. She salted them separately, wrapped them in clean canvas, tied them with rope. The gift looked respectable. The barn was rearranged in 3 days. Horg gave the orders. The front part was left as is. 15 bundles of dried meat, a little fish, sacks of turnips. Modest. The back section was behind a partition. That's where the main stockpile was. Tons of meat. They hung burlap over the partition and propped it up with barrels of water. From the outside, it looked like a wall. Aymeric arrived on the 9th day. He wasn't alone. With him were 6 horsemen, guards, all in chainmail under their cloaks, swords at their belts, spears in their saddle loops. Lord Aymeric was a tall, thin man of 38. His face was sharp. His eyes were quick. He dismounted at the gate. He surveyed the palisade. He surveyed the houses. He surveyed the people standing along the street and watching him. Horg met him at the kitchen. He bowed. Not too low. Just enough to show respect, but not so low as to show fear. Horg knew how to bow properly. Aymeric nodded. He asked how the village was. Horg replied that it was hard, but they were managing. There was little meat, few turnips, but no one had died. Yet. Aymeric asked to see the granary. Horg led the way. He opened the front door. Aymeric went inside. He looked around. 15 bundles. Fish, turnips, meager. He came out. He looked at Horg. He said he'd heard something different. He'd heard that Grannmerk was a place of plenty these days, that hunters were hauling meat by wagon, that the granaries were bursting at the seams. Horg replied calmly. He said that rumors are always more than the truth. Aymeric smirked. He didn't believe it, but he didn't press the matter. He was a pragmatist, not a tyrant. He was interested in profit, not punishment. That evening, Horg hosted a dinner for his guests in the kitchen. It was the best meal Bryn could prepare without revealing their true reserves. Thick wild boar soup, bread made from barley flour, roasted turnips with lard. Aymeric ate in silence. So did his men. After dinner, Horg brought out a gift: 4 wild boar carcasses, salted and wrapped in canvas. Aymeric looked at the meat, then at Horg. He asked who had hunted them. Horg pointed to Si-hyeon. He was standing in the corner of the kitchen. Aymeric walked over to him. He looked him up and down. Skinny, young, unremarkable. He asked his name. Si-hyun told him. Aymeric asked how he managed to bring back so much meat when the other hunters along the border returned empty-handed. Si-hyun replied that he aimed and shot, just like everyone else. Aymeric smirked. It was the same phrase he'd said to Horg. It had become his shield. Simple, short, impenetrable. Aymeric stood there for another second. Then he nodded, turned around, told Horg that he accepted the gift, that he considered this year's tithe paid, that he'd return in the spring to see how things were going. In the morning, Aymeric left. 4 wild boars on the spare horse, 6 riders behind him. Si-hyun stood at the gate and watched as the party disappeared into the snowy forest. Horg stood beside him. He said that Aymeric wasn't a fool. He knew they hadn't shown him everything. But he played along, for now. Because 4 wild boars were a good gift. And because it wasn't worth it to put pressure on a small village in the winter. He'd come back in the spring, and he'd take a closer look. Si-hyun nodded. Spring was still far off. He'd figure things out by then. That evening, Ylva came to see him. She stood at the door. She said that Aymeric had been questioning her father while Horg was showing him around the village. He asked about the arrows, how many arrowheads he forges, and for whom. Brand answered evasively, but Aymeric remembered. He's counting. The number of arrowheads, the number of arrows, the amount of meat. He's adding up the numbers, looking for discrepancies. Si-hyun listened. Then he said, "Let him count. The numbers alone, without the main answer, won't tell us anything. And he won't get the main answer." Ylva looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down next to him on the threshold. They sat in silence, watching the snow. Then she stood up and left. She didn't say goodbye, she just left. Si-hyun sat there for another 10 minutes. Then he went inside. He lay down. He closed his eyes. Before falling asleep, he thought that 400 people outside the walls were sleeping, well-fed, in warm homes in the middle of winter. Not a single one had died of hunger. Not a single one. Yet. For now, that was the most important phrase in his life. Winter had passed its midpoint and was rolling toward spring, the 3rd month of cold weather. The snow lay thick and heavy. But the days were getting half an hour longer. The sun peeked out more often. Icicles on the roofs grew and fell with a crash. Grannmerk breathed steadily. The granary held up. Bryn handed out rations without a hitch. Soup every evening. Meat every evening. Not much, but consistent. People had grown accustomed to being full, not to abundance, but to the certainty that there would be food tomorrow as well. This changed their faces. Wrinkles smoothed out. Shoulders straightened. Voices grew louder. The village came alive, not in body, but in spirit. Si-hyun went hunting twice a week, sometimes 3 times if the weather permitted. Ylva by his side. Toby waited at the gate with a quiver. A rhythm had settled in. Wake up, the forest. A shot, meat. Return, sleep. And again. Toward the end of the 3rd month of winter, what Si-hyun had both waited for and feared at the same time happened. He ventured deeper into the Wildlands than usual, 5 kilometers from Grannmerk. Ylva walked beside him. The bull's tracks led north, deep into the wilderness, further than the two of them had ever ventured together. The forest here was dead. Not diseased, as it was at the border, but dead. The trees stood bare, without bark. White trunks, like bones, jutted out of the snow. No moss, no lichen, nothing alive, only snow and dead trees. Ylva stopped. She looked at Si-hyeon. She didn't say a word, but he could read it on her face. She didn't like this place. Neither did he. They walked on. The bull's tracks meandered between the dead trunks. The beast was walking nervously, changing direction, speeding up, slowing down. Something was troubling him. Si-hyeon noticed a second set of tracks. Not hooves, paws. Large ones, wider than a palm, with claws, deep indentations in the snow. Something heavy was moving parallel to the bull, not behind it, but beside it, as if accompanying it or guiding it. Si-hyeon crouched down by the tracks. He touched the edges. The snow hadn't been smoothed over. Fresh. An hour ago, maybe less. He looked at Ylva. She had already seen it. She stood with a knife in her hand. Her eyes narrowed. She said quietly that it was a wolf. But not an ordinary one. The track was too big. An ordinary wolf leaves a track the size of a fist. This one was twice as wide. The dark pack. Si-hyun straightened up. His hand rested on his bow. The arrow was nocked. They stood in the dead forest and listened. Silence. Then, no silence. The crunch of snow. To the right, far away. Then closer. And another crunch. To the left. Two sources of sound. Two beasts. Or one moving very fast. Ylva stood with her back to Si-hyun, a knife in her right hand. With her left, she grabbed his shoulder. She squeezed. A signal. Be alert. He saw it. Among the dead tree trunks 40 paces away, a beast wolf. Larger than any wolf Sihyon had seen in textbooks, the size of a calf. Its fur wasn't gray, but black with brown spots. Its eyes were yellow. They glowed. They didn't reflect light. They glowed on their own, from within. Dark saliva dripped from its mouth onto the snow. Where the drops fell, the snow melted and sizzled. The beast stood and stared at them. It didn't attack. It didn't growl. It just stared. A second one appeared on the left, just like the first. Black, huge, yellow eyes. It emerged from behind a tree trunk silently and came to a stop 30 paces away. Two wolf beasts. The dark pack. Si-hyun stood motionless. His breathing was steady. His heart was racing, but his hands were steady. He looked at the first wolf. 40 paces. Too far for an accurate shot. The arrow might not pierce the hide. Or it might pierce it, but miss the heart. And a miss here meant death. The wolf on the right moved. 1 step. 2. Slowly. Not an attack. An approach. 35 paces. 30. 25. It was approaching in an arc, circling around. The second wolf stood still, keeping his attention fixed, while the first one approached from the side. Si-hyun turned toward the one that was moving. 20 steps. The beast stopped, crouched on its hind legs. The muscles beneath its fur tensed. It was preparing to pounce. Si-hyun raised his bow. He pulled the string taut. The beast wolf was larger than a typical wolf, but its anatomy was the same. The heart was behind the front shoulder blade, below the middle of the chest, between the third and fourth ribs. He knew where. The wolf leaped, not forward, but to the side. It was moving out of the line of fire. Smart. A hunting beast. It knew what a bow was. Si-hyun didn't shoot. He waited. The wolf landed, froze for a second, regrouping. In that split second, Si-hyeon fired. The arrow flew 18 paces. It struck the wolf in the side, right between the ribs, in the heart. The beast twitched. It fell. Its legs scraped the snow for 3 seconds. It lay still. A second wolf appeared nearby. A duplicate. Just as black, just as huge. Dead, without a wound. And then the duplicate opened its eyes. Yellow, glowing. It was alive. For a second, maybe 2. Its jaws opened. Its paws twitched. It tried to stand up. Si-hyun grabbed a second arrow, knocked it, drawn the bowstring, fired. The arrow pierced the chest of the revived copy, right in the heart. The beast fell back, froze, dead. This time, for good. Si-hyun stood there, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the recoil of the double duplication. 2 shots to the heart, 2 duplications. No, 1 duplication. The first shot killed and duplicated. The second shot killed the copy. The copy didn't duplicate. The system didn't work on duplicated copies. He remembered that. The second real wolf, the one standing on the left, he vanished. While Si-hyun was shooting the first one, the second one slipped away. Silently. He dissolved among the dead tree trunks. Ilwa stood with her knife at the ready, white as the snow all around her, but her hand holding the knife didn't tremble. She looked at the 2 dead wolves, then at Si-hyun. She said one word. "Let's go," she said. They left, quickly. They didn't run, but they walked as fast as they could. They left the dead wolves behind. Si-hyun didn't dare take any of the beast wolf's meat. The dark saliva that melted the snow suggested there was something poisonous inside these beasts. On the way, Si-hyun thought. The beast wolf's replica came to life. For a second, but it came to life. That didn't happen with ordinary animals. Rabbits, wild boars, deer, bulls. All the replicas were dead, immediately, without exception. But the beast wolf came to life. Why? Maybe because the beast wolf isn't an ordinary beast? There's something else inside it, something dark, something that gives it glowing eyes and poisonous saliva. And that something else doesn't die from a simple copy. It needs a separate death, a separate arrow. Si-hyun remembered. From that day on, he always prepared a second arrow, placed on the bowstring in his left hand while his right held the bow. Uncomfortable, slow, but necessary. They returned to Grannmerk by evening. Si-hyun told Horg. "That's it, beast wolves, a reanimated copy, a second shot." Horg listened without interrupting. His face darkened with every word. When Si-hyun finished, Horg was silent for a long time. Then he said that the dark hordes were drawing closer. They'd been spotted 10 kilometers from the village before, then 7, now 5. They were moving toward the border, toward Grannmerk. Si-hyun nodded. He could tell from the tracks. The beast wolves weren't following the bull. They were heading for the settlement. The bull had simply crossed their path. Horg asked what to do. Si-hyun didn't answer right away. He thought about it that evening. He thought about it all night. In the morning, he went to Horg. He said they needed defenses. The palisade was sturdy, but not strong enough for beasts like these. A beast wolf the size of a calf could leap over a 2-meter palisade. It needed to be higher. They needed sharpened stakes on top. They needed firing positions on the walls. They needed night watch. Horg nodded. They began work that very day. Logs from the forest. The men chopped and hauled them. The women sanded them down. The children carried kindling for the fire. Brand forged staples and nails. Ylva helped her father during the day and sharpened the stakes with a knife in the evening. Grannmerk was taking shape, not as a village that hides, but as a village that prepares. Si-hyun oversaw the placement of the archery platforms, 4 points along the perimeter. Each had room for 2 archers, raised 3 meters high, a good view 50 paces around the wall. Horg assigned the archers, 8 men, shifts of 4, day and night. Sihyon trained them, showed them where to shoot, at the heart, not the body, not the head, at the heart, between the shoulder blade and the ribs. Every beast, every time. The 8 hunters listened. Not all of them understood, but they all learned. By the end of the 4th month of winter, the palisade had been raised by 1 meter. The stakes at the top jutted outward. The archery platforms stood firm. Watches were kept according to schedule. Grannmerk was ready, or so he thought. The last month of winter began with a thaw. The snow settled. Water dripped from the roofs. The stream behind the village swelled and roared. The forest stirred. The birds returned. The first living sounds in 4 months. Sihyon stood at the gate and listened. Spring was coming, and with spring would come the answers to the questions he had put off all winter. What breathes in the depths of the wildlands? Why is the forest sick? Why are the dark flocks moving toward the border? And what was that tree with a face he saw in his dream? But first, he had to survive until spring. There were 4 weeks left. Spring arrived wet and noisy. The snow melted quickly, the streams swelled, mud flooded the trails. The forest breathed dampness and the scent of thawing earth. Grannmerk had survived the winter. 400 people. Not a single one had died of starvation. For the first time in 5 years. Bryn took inventory on the last day of winter. There was enough meat in the barn to last 2 weeks. It was touch and go. Another week of winter, and they would have had to cut back on rations. But they made it in time. Spring had opened up the forest, and the game was making its way back toward the border. Deer, boars, even hares, which they hadn't seen since fall. The Wildlands were releasing their game for the warm season. The dark flocks had retreated deeper into the wilderness. The tracks of the wolf beasts had vanished from the trails, as if winter were their season and spring belonged to others. Si-hyeon didn't let his guard down. He hunted every day. He restocked the granary, not for this winter, but for the next one. He was thinking ahead, 2 seasons, 3, even 4. 400 people shouldn't have to teeter on the brink every year. They needed a reserve, a solid, deep one, in case he fell ill, broke his arm, or didn't return from the forest. The village couldn't depend on just one man. Horg thought the same way. In the 2nd week of spring, he gathered the hunting brotherhood, 12 men, all who shot the bow. He gave a speech, a short one. He said that they'd survived the winter thanks to one young man, that it was a disgrace to the brotherhood, that 12 grown men hadn't been able to do what an 18-year-old apprentice had done, that as of today, everything changes. A new way of shooting, the anatomy of the beast, the vital spot. Everyone learns, everyone trains. Anyone who doesn't want to can leave. The brotherhood was silent. No one left. Si-hyun began to teach, 2 hours every evening. Bark targets on the trees, the size of a boar's heart, then the size of a rabbit's heart, 10 paces away, then 15, then 20. 12 hunters took shots. They cursed, they missed, they shot again. After 2 weeks, 3 of them were hitting consistently from 15 paces. Garm, Steph, and a young guy named Dale, who was 22 and whom the Brotherhood had also considered mediocre until that spring. Dale turned out to be talented. Steady hands, a keen eye. It's just that no one had ever taught him to aim for the heart rather than the body. A month later, 5 out of 12 were consistently hitting the heart from a working distance. No double shots. Double shots still only worked for Si-hyun, but a clean kill from a precise shot yielded better meat. Faster, without suffering, without spoilage. The Brotherhood was learning not only to shoot at in a new way, but also to think in a new way. A beast is not a target. A beast is a life you take. Take it cleanly, or don't take it at all. Horg hammered this into their heads like nails into logs, harshly and without discussion. By mid-spring, Grannmerk was hunting differently than any other settlement along the border. More precisely, cleaner, more efficiently. The granary was filling up, not just thanks to Sihyon. The Brotherhood brought in game every day. Not as much as Sihon's double haul, but consistently. 4 boars a week from the Brotherhood, plus 2 bulls from Sihyon, plus small game. The meat was smoked and salted, stored in the granary. By the end of the second month of spring, the stockpile stood at 12 metric tons, more than at the start of last winter, and summer hadn't even begun yet. In the third week of the second month of spring, Sihyon made a decision. He sat that evening with his notebook, rereading his entries. 42 entries had become 120. Every animal, every shot, every result. Patterns were forming into a system. Point of impact, distance, angle, meat quality, weight. These weren't just notes, it was a textbook. The foundation for training any hunter. He began to rewrite everything neatly. In the evenings, by the light of an oil lamp, in neat handwriting, diagrams, drawings of the animal's anatomy. A rabbit, side view, the location of the heart. A wild boar, side view. A deer. A forest ox. For each animal, the point of impact, distance, angle, an arrow indicating the direction of the shot. Toby sat nearby and watched. He asked what each drawing meant. Sihyon explained, quietly, patiently. The boy memorized it all. 4 months after awakening in this world, Sihyon proposed a law to Horg. A simple one. Hunt only for food, not for fun, not for pelts to sell, not for trophies, only meat, only for the village. Anyone who broke it would be banished. Horg listened. He thought. He asked why. Si-hyun explained. The forest was sick. There were fewer animals than there should be. The dark flocks were encroaching on their territory. Every animal killed unnecessarily was one less to rely on in winter. They couldn't afford wastefulness. Ever. Horg put it to a vote. That evening, by the campfire. 400 people, everyone who could stand. Horg explained the law. Briefly, harshly. No poetry. Hunting for sport meant exile. They voted by a show of hands. Unanimously. Not a single hand remained down. The 400 people who had survived a starving winter knew the value of every scrap of meat. The law went into effect that very evening. Si-hyun stood in the crowd and looked at the raised hands. 400 hands. 400 people who trusted the boy with the bow. Not because he was a hero, because he fed them when no one else could. That trust grew out of bowls of soup, from the pieces of meat in the communal pot, from the quiet morning trips into the forest and the evening returns with a bundle on his back. After the vote, Horg approached Sihyon. He stood beside him. He spoke quietly so no one else could hear. He said that in 4 months, Sihyon had done more for Grannmerk than any elder had in 20 years. Then he paused. He added that he didn't deserve it. Not the village. Him. Horg. For 2 years, he'd viewed Sihyon as a burden. For 2 years, he'd let others humiliate him. For 2 years, he'd seen those trembling hands and decided there was nothing behind them. He was wrong. Horg didn't apologize. He didn't know how to apologize with words. But what he said was closer to an apology than anything he'd said in 52 years. Si-hyun nodded. He didn't say anything. They stood by the campfire in silence. Then Horg left to check on the sentries. Si-hyun stayed behind. Toby approached. He sat down beside him. He pressed his shoulder against Si-hyun's. Warm, small, alive. They sat there, watching the fire. The 4th month, summer. The forest stood green and bustling. The birds had returned. Insects buzzed in the undergrowth. The stream beyond the village had receded to its usual level, and women were doing laundry on the rocks. Grannmerk was living. Not merely surviving, but living. Children were swimming in the pond. The elders sat on benches by their houses, basking in the sun. The dogs in the cookhouse yard lay full and lazy. Ylva no longer fed them her own portion. There was enough for everyone. The granary was filling up. 20 metric tons of meat by the start of summer. Horg had set a goal. 40 metric tons by fall. With the Brotherhood and Sihyon, it was achievable. For the first time in Grannmerk's history, the village was preparing for winter 6 months in advance, not during 6 frantic weeks. In the 2nd week of summer, Imrik arrived, just as he had promised, with the same 6 horsemen, and with 2 men Sihyon had never seen before. One was thin and tall, wearing a long traveling cloak without a coat of arms. The other was stocky, with a short sword at his belt and eyes that moved faster than any hunter's. Imrik dismounted at the gate. He looked around. He saw the new palisade, taller, sturdier, with spikes on top, shooting positions, sentries at their posts. A village that had transformed over the winter from a vulnerable target into a fortress. Imrik didn't smile, but something flashed in his eyes. Interest, or respect, or calculation. Horg greeted him just as he had last time. A bow, not a low one. Sufficient. Imrik nodded. He asked how things were going. Horg replied that they were better than they had been in the winter. Imrik asked to be shown around the village. Horg led the way. This time, it was harder to hide anything. The granary was full, and it was impossible to hide 20 metric tons of meat behind burlap sacks. Horg opened the doors. Imrik walked in. He stood there for a long time, looking at the rows of meat hanging on hooks, at the barrels of salted meat, at the bundles of dried game hanging all the way to the ceiling. Then he turned to Horg. He said that last time they'd shown him a different barn. Horg replied that last time the barn had been different too. Winter had been a time of famine. Summer was more bountiful. Imrik didn't argue. He wasn't a fool, but he was a pragmatist. He did the math. That evening, at dinner, which this time was lavish because there was no point in hiding anything, Imrik sat next to Sihyon. On purpose. His men sat apart. The thin one in the cloak and the stocky one with the sword sat in a corner and watched. Imrik ate in silence. Then he spoke up. He said he'd heard more about Sihyon than the latter realized. That the neighboring villages were starving. That 3 settlements to the east had lost 10 people each over the winter. That Grannmerk was the only place in the borderlands where no one had died. That this was unusual. That he wanted to understand why. Sihyon listened. He answered simply. He said they were hunting better than before. New techniques. They shoot more accurately. They waste fewer arrows. They bring back more meat. Imrik nodded. He said he understood. But technique doesn't explain the volume. 12 hunters can't bring in 20 metric tons of meat in half a year. Not even if every shot is perfect. The numbers just don't add up. Si-hyun remained silent. Emmerich didn't press the issue. He proposed a deal. Meat from Grannmerk in exchange for protection. He's a baron. He has 40 soldiers. Neighboring barons have their eyes on his lands. If Grannmerk supplies meat regularly, Emmerich will ensure protection against any claims. No one would touch the village as long as it was under his control. Si-hyun thought. Emmerich waited. Horg sat nearby and said nothing. Si-hyun asked how much meat. Emmerich named a figure. 200 kilograms a month. That's a lot. 200 kilograms is 3 boars, or 1 bull without doubling. With the double portion, that's 1 trip into the forest. Acceptable. But Emmerich could raise the price at any moment. Si-hyun said he'd agree to 150. Emmerich smirked. He agreed. They shook hands. Emmerich left in the morning. The thin man in the cloak and the stocky man with the sword left with him. But Si-hyun noticed that before they left, the stocky man stood by the barn for a long time, looking around. Not at the meat, at the lock on the door, at the thickness of the walls, at the arrangement of the windows. He wasn't assessing the supplies, he was assessing the defenses. Ylva approached Sihyon after they left. She said that the thin man in the cloak had been asking questions in the village while Emmerich was having dinner with Horg. He was questioning the women at the well. How much meat the village eats. How often Sihyon goes into the forest, alone or with someone. When he returns. What he brings back. The women answered differently. Some said a lot. Bryn remained silent. Ylva remained silent too. But the thin man asked skillfully, not directly, from a distance, through compliments and sympathy, a professional. Sihyon listened. He nodded. He said what was expected. Emmerich is keeping track. His people are gathering data. Sooner or later, he'll realize that something is happening in Grannmerk that can't be explained by ordinary hunting. But as long as he's getting 150 kilograms a month, he won't dig any deeper. The money is working for them, for now. The end of the 4th month, Si-hyun came home after a hunt. 2 boars. Routine. He sat down on the threshold, opened his notebook. 140 entries. He flipped through the pages. Every hunt, every animal, every shot, every result, patterns, rules, exceptions. It wasn't a notebook. It was a book. The first hunting manual based on anatomy and precision. There was nothing like it in Grannmerk. There was nothing like it in any of the border settlements. He closed the notebook. He looked at the forest beyond the stockade, the Wildlands, green in summer. But he knew that disease lurked beneath the greenery. The roots were rotting. The dark flocks were waiting. The spirit of the forest breathed in the depths. Winter would come again, and the dark flocks would draw closer, closer every year, stronger every year, bolder every year. He couldn't just sit and wait. Sooner or later, he'd have to go deeper, to find the cause, to find the source. But not today. Today he was tired. Today he had 2 boars in the barn and 400 well-fed people behind him. Toby ran up. He took the quiver, sweat toward the house. Si-hyun smiled, not broadly, just at the corner of his mouth, and followed him. The 6th month. The end of summer. The barn held 35 metric tons of meat. 5 more to go until they reached Horg's goal. The Brotherhood worked in perfect harmony. 5 hunters shot with precision. The rest were catching up. Dale had become the second best after Si-hyun. He hit a boar in the heart from 18 steps 8 times out of 10. Young, quick, with hands that never trembled. Si-hyun trusted him to hold the rear when he went into the Wildlands. Dale covered him, silently, reliably. Grannmerk was changing on the outside. New roofs, patched up walls. They'd started building a second barn in the middle of summer. The well had been cleaned out. The path from the gate to the kitchen had been paved with stone. Little things. But little things that make up a life, not just survival. People who don't think about food start thinking about home, about cleanliness, about order, about the future. In the second week of the 6th month, Si-hyun set out for the Wildlands alone, without Ilva, without Dale, without Toby, early in the morning, before dawn. He wasn't going hunting. He was going to search for the shadow that breathed in the depths, the tree with a face from a dream, the source of the disease. 5 kilometers in, then 6, 7. The forest changed as it always did. Healthy near the border, sick further in, dead even further. But beyond the dead zone, something new began. At the 8th kilometer, the trees came back to life. Not healthy, different. The trunks were thicker than usual. The bark was dark, almost black, but intact, no cracks. The leaves on the branches were large and fleshy, dark green with a purple tint. The grass underfoot was thick and tall, knee-high, flowers of unfamiliar shapes, petals the color of old blood. The scent was sweet, intoxicating. The botanist inside Sihyon was screaming. This was not a healthy forest. This forest had been overfed with something, like a plant that had overdosed on fertilizer. Its growth was frenzied, but abnormal. The leaves were too large, the trunks were too thick, the colors were too bright. Something was nourishing this forest from within, something powerful and abnormal. He kept walking, carefully, bow in hand, 2 arrows at the ready. At the 9th kilometer, he heard breathing. Familiar, low, deep, but different. Not calm like before. Heavy, strained, like the breathing of a feverish patient. A whistling inhale, a wheezing exhale. Sihyon followed the sound, through the thickets of the overgrown forest, parting the grass with his hands, stepping over roots as thick as his thigh, diving under branches that hung low and heavy. He emerged into a clearing and stopped. A tree. Huge. A trunk 10 fists wide, just like in a dream. The crown stretched into the sky and blocked out the sun. The leaves overhead were black, not dark green, but black, as if charred. And on the trunk was a face. An old one, etched with wrinkles that were cracks in the bark. The eyes were closed. The mouth was slightly open. A breath was escaping from it. Heavy, hoarse, painful. The spirit of the forest. Si-hyun stood and watched. A minute. 5. The breathing didn't change. The eyes didn't open. The spirit was sleeping. Or dying. Or both. Si-hyun stepped closer. 10 paces. 5. He reached out his hand. He touched the bark. Warm, like the skin of a living creature. A pulse. He could feel the pulse beneath his fingers. Slow, heavy, irregular. The tree's heart was beating, and it was beating poorly. He moved his hand lower, toward the roots. Where the massive roots plunged into the ground, he saw it. Black threads, thin, like ropes. They wrapped around the roots from below. They emerged from the ground and dug into the bark. Dozens of threads, hundreds. They reached deep into the earth like the tentacles of something lurking beneath the tree. And they were pulling. He saw the bark around the threads darken. He saw the wood beneath it soften. The threads were draining the life from the tree, slowly, drop by drop, year after year, decade after decade. That was why the forest was sick. The spirit of the forest was dying, and whatever was killing it was draining its life force and poisoning the forest around it. The dead zone between the healthy forest and this clearing was where the poison was strongest. Here, near the tree, the forest was overfed because the spirit was expelling energy in an attempt to survive. Further away from it, the energy dried up and the forest was dying. Even further on, the healthy forest began, a place the poison had not yet reached. Si-hyun stood by the roots and looked at the black threads. He touched one with the tip of his knife. The thread twitched, as if it were alive. The knife was seared by cold. Si-hyun pulled his hand back. A dark stain remained on the blade. The metal had tarnished in that spot. The thread was not a plant, not a fungus. Something else. Something that lived underground and fed on an ancient spirit. Si-hyun straightened up. He looked at the tree's face. Its eyes were still closed, but its lips twitched. A single movement, as if the spirit were trying to say something. It couldn't. Its breathing grew slightly quieter. Then it returned to its usual rhythm. Si-hyun turned around. He headed back. 9 kilometers to Grannmerk, a 5-hour walk. He walked and thought. The spirit of the forest is dying. Something ancient is devouring it from within through the roots. This process has been going on for years, perhaps decades. The dark packs are the result. The forest is poisoned, and the beasts are mutating. Ordinary wolves are becoming beast wolves. Ordinary territories are becoming the wildlands, and the process is accelerating. Every year it gets worse. Every year the dark packs get closer. Every year the forest suffers more. If the spirit dies completely, what will become of the forest? What will become of the wildlands? What will become of Grannmerk on its border? He didn't know the answers, but he knew he'd found the source. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. He returned to Grannmerk after dark. Ylva was waiting at the gate. She didn't ask where he'd been. She looked at his face. She realized he had seen something. He walked past her, then he stopped. He turned around. He told her he had found it. Found the cause. A tree. A huge one. With a face. It's dying, and when it dies, the forest will die with it. Ylva listened. She didn't interrupt. Then she asked one thing. She asked if it could be saved. Si-hyun replied that he didn't know. Not yet, anyway. They stood by the gate in the darkness. Then they went their separate ways. That night, Si-hyun couldn't sleep. He lay there staring at the ceiling. He thought about the tree with a face, about the black threads in its roots, about the breath that grew weaker with each passing year, about the 400 people outside the walls who slept well-fed and didn't know that their forest was dying. The 7th month. Fall came early. The leaves began to turn yellow in the first week. The air grew colder. Morning fog spread across the ground until noon. Grannmerk was preparing for its second winter. But this time, there was no panic. The granary held 38 metric tons of meat. The second granary was finished in being filled. The turnips had been harvested from the fields. The barley had been threshed. The mushrooms had been dried. Firewood had been chopped. The village ran like a well-oiled machine. Everyone knew their place. Everyone did their part. Horg coordinated. Bryn kept track of the supplies. Brand forged. Ylva tended the forest. Si-hyun hunted. Toby carried arrows and learned to shoot. Over the course of 7 months, the boy had grown stronger. His ribs no longer stuck out. His arms had filled out. His fingers had become steady on the bowstring. He could hit a target the size of a fist from 10 paces away. For an 8-year-old, that was brilliant. Si-hyun didn't praise him out loud. He simply nodded after each accurate shot. Toby understood. Si-hyun's nod was worth more than any words. On the third week of fall, wolves howled in the night. Not ordinary ones. The sound was low and drawn out, vibrating. It came not from the forest, but from beneath the earth, as if the earth itself were groaning. The sentries on the watchtowers sounded the alarm. Kor rallied the brotherhood. 12 hunters stood on the walls, arrows nocked, torches burning. Si-hyun stood on the northern watchtower. He gazed into the darkness beyond the palisade. The torches illuminated 30 paces. Beyond that, darkness. The howling subsided. Silence. Then eyes emerged from the darkness. Yellow, glowing. One pair, a second pair, a third. 5 pairs of yellow eyes at the edge of the light. 5 wolf beasts. They stood in a row, staring at the wall. They didn't move. They didn't growl. They just stood and watched. Si-hyun counted. 5. This wasn't a hunt. It was reconnaissance. They'd come to look, to assess, to gauge. A minute later, the eyes went out, one pair after another. The beast wolves turned and vanished into the darkness, silently. Si-hyun stood on the clearing until dawn. They didn't return. In the Mitra, Horg called the council meeting. Si-hyun, Garm, Steph, Dale. Ylva came on her own. No one objected. Si-hyun recounted what he had seen. 5 beast wolves. Reconnaissance. They're studying the village, looking at the walls, counting the defenders, preparing an attack. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Horg asked when. Si-hyun replied that he didn't know. Maybe in a week, maybe in a month. It depends on what's controlling the flocks. He told the council about the spirit of the forest, about the tree with a face, about the black threads, about how the forest is dying and the dark flocks are a symptom, not the cause. The brotherhood listened in silence. Garm turned pale. Steph clenched his jaw. Dale sat motionless. Horg listened as always, his face as stone. When Si-hyun finished, Horg asked what to do. Si-hyun suggested 2 courses of action. First, defense. Reinforce the walls, more stakes, a deeper moat around the palisade, flaming barriers, barrels of tar on the platforms. He didn't know if the beast wolves were afraid of fire or not, but fire provides light, and light provides visibility. Second, reconnaissance. He needed to return to the spirit of the forest, to understand what those black threads were, to understand if they could be cut or destroyed, to understand if the spirit could be saved, or at least slow its death. Horg nodded at the first point. At the second, he shook his head. He said that going 9 kilometers into the Wildlands alone was suicide, especially now that the flocks were active. Si-hyun replied that he wouldn't be alone. He'd be with Ylva. Horg looked at Ylva. She nodded. Briefly, without hesitation. Horg cursed. Then he said, "All right, but on one condition." Dale would third, as cover. Si-hyun agreed. It took 3 days to prepare. Brand forged new arrowheads, heavier than the old ones, with serrations. For beast wolves. A regular arrowhead might not pierce their thick hide from a distance. These would. Si-hyun made 12 new arrows, the best he'd ever made. The shafts were made of seasoned ash wood, straight as a ruler. The fletching was made from hawk feathers that Dale had found at the edge of the forest. Hawk feathers are stiffer than goose feathers. The arrow flies more smoothly. On the 4th day, they set out. Si-hyun in the lead, Ylva behind him. Dale brought up the rear. 3 bows, 36 arrows among the 3 of them, knives on their belts, water flasks, dried meat for 2 days in case they were delayed. They crossed the border into the Wildlands around noon. The sick forest greeted them with silence. They walked in silence. Ylva read the tracks. There, wolves were becoming more numerous. Tracks were everywhere, fresh ones, old ones, paths trampled by paws. The beasts were out here constantly, not alone, but in packs. 5 tracks side by side. 7. 10. The pack was growing. At the 6th kilometer, Dale tapped Si-hyeon on the shoulder. He pointed to the right. A shadow flashed between the trees. Black, fast, gone. They stopped. They waited. A minute. 2. Silence. They moved on. At the 7th kilometer, Ylva stopped. She crouched down. She showed Sihyon a track. Not a wolf's. Something else. Larger. Longer. Deeper claw marks. 5 toes instead of 4. Sihyon crouched down beside her. He looked. It wasn't a wolf. Something else. Bigger than a wolf. With a 5-toed paw. He didn't know what it was. Neither did Ylva. They exchanged glances. They kept going, more cautiously. At the 8th kilometer, the overgrown forest began. Grass up to their waists, blood-red flowers, dark tree trunks. Dale walked along, turning his head from side to side. He'd never been this deep before. No one from Grannmerk had ever been this deep except for Si-hyeon. At the 9th kilometer, Sihyon saw a clearing. A tree. Huge. With a face. They reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. Dale exhaled through clenched teeth. Ylva stood silently, watching. The tree was breathing. Heavily. Raspily. Its eyes were closed. The black threads on the roots were thicker than last time. There were more of them. Si-hyun saw new ones, fresh ones, as thin as a spider web. They were crawling upward along the bark. Before, they had only wrapped around the roots. Now they were reaching the trunk. The process was accelerating. Something underground was building up pressure. It was devouring the tree faster. It was in a hurry. Si-hyun approached the tree. He placed his palm on the bark. A pulse. Weaker than last time. Slower. With long pauses between beats. Its life was fading. He bent down toward the roots. He took out his knife. He tried to cut one of the black threads. The blade touched the thread and bounced off, as if it were stone. The thread was hard, impossible to cut with ordinary metal. He tried another one. Same result. The knife slid along the thread without leaving a mark. He tried to pry the thread loose and tear it from the bark. The thread held fast. It was embedded in the tree like a root in the ground. Part of the tree. Part of the disease. Inseparable. Si-hyun straightened up. He looked at the spirit's face. Its lips moved. Just like last time. A single movement. Soundless. Then its eyes twitched. Its eyelids lifted a millimeter. A green light flashed through the slit and went out. The spirit was trying to wake up. It couldn't. It was too weak. Si-hyun stood in front of it and felt powerless. He was a hunter. He knew how to shoot a heart. But what was there to shoot here? The threads that couldn't be cut with a knife? The ground beneath the tree? The tree itself? He didn't know. Not yet, anyway. They spent an hour by the tree. Si-hyun examined every root, every thread. He wrote it down in his notebook, the location, the thickness, the direction. The threads came from the south. All of them. From a single point underground, south of the tree. Something was there, underground, and it was reaching out its tentacles toward the spirit. The return trip took 6 hours. They walked quickly. They didn't stop. Twice they saw yellow eyes among the trees. The wolf beasts watched but didn't attack. They escorted them to the border. At the edge of the healthy forest, the eyes disappeared. The pack didn't venture beyond the Wildlands. Not yet, anyway. They returned to Grannmerk before dark. Horg was waiting at the gate.